Welcome back, fellow true crime enthusiasts, to today's case file, part 8 of the series, Who Murdered Jimmy Gaul? The Final Threads Unraveled. Welcome to Body of Crime, your go-to true crime podcast, where we plunge headfirst into the gripping world of criminal mysteries. Join your hosts, Jose Medina, Crystal Garcia, and Alicia Anaya, as we deliver the full stories, immersing you in the heart of each case. With spine-chilling cases, in-depth analysis, captivating interviews, and a comprehensive examination of the evidence, embark on a thrilling journey with us as we explore bone-chilling cases from around the globe. Whether you're a seasoned true crime enthusiast or a fresh face in the genre, we guarantee to keep you on the edge of your seat. So put on your detective hat, grab your notepad, and get ready to dive into the thrilling world of Body of Crime. In our last installment of the series, Who is David William Adams?, we explored the seemingly odd disappearance of 8-year-old David William Adams on May 3rd, 1968. David, a third grader at Clark Elementary School in Issaquah, Washington, vanished just miles from the Gaul family home. This family included Bill and his brother Randy. Both Bill and Randy's father, Donald Lewis, and stepmother Elizabeth Betty Gaul worked at Boeing alongside David's father, William Donald Adams. David, like Jimmy Gaul, was an elementary school student. The parallels between these cases are quite striking. Jimmy disappeared on May 2nd, 1964, and David on May 3rd, 1968. The Gaul family lived next door to Jimmy and close to David in both Bellevue and Issaquah. Jimmy's father worked at Aerojet in California with Bill and Randy's father, adding another layer of synchronicity. David's father was a scoutmaster, and the Gaul brothers were deeply involved in Boy Scouts, their father also having served as a scoutmaster. Both brothers exhibited troubling behaviors that included sexual dysfunction, predatory behavior, and a lack of morals, leading to their eventual imprisonment, with Randy remaining incarcerated until his death. In today's episode, we will unravel some of the final threads of this complex case. We will discuss some of the actions we've taken to bring the investigation back into the purview of cold case specialists in both California and Washington, as well as escalating the case to the district attorney's offices in both states. We will also discuss some of the discontent that has emerged during the investigation and reveal the messages we've received that could further shed additional light on the case. Just when you think you've got it all figured out and there is nowhere else to go with this case, something else unravels, revealing more, leaving us with more questions and less answers.
Both the cases of Jimmy Gaul and David Adams have been thoroughly researched and investigated. As both are known as cold cases, they have surpassed the average 400 investigation hours by thousands of hours. We began working on Jimmy's case in November of 2023, and our last message concerning Jimmy's case from someone new came in around the end of March. Throughout this period, countless community members have participated by reaching out to people, providing statements and recollections, sharing photos, and more. It is these connections and the willingness of friends, family, and sometimes strangers to help bring cases like Jimmy's and David's into the spotlight. This collaborative effort offers varying perspectives, introduces new information, and ultimately generates the momentum needed to potentially solve a case. Regardless of all the positivity that occurs during an investigation, there's also a significant amount of negativity that can arise. Investigators may receive anonymous, strange messages, complaints about the accuracy of interviews, or concerns from family members who are unaware of the case's progress, the information obtained, or the details being publicized. Additionally, various individuals may attempt to control the direction of the case, dictating who is contacted and why someone should be contacted or why they should not be contacted. This often necessitates shifting the investigation into a more open-ended direction, challenging those restrictions and pushing the investigative envelope so that those who have become fixated on a single aspect or direction can refocus on the big picture, try to remove any biases or preconceived notions, and instead follow the evidence, regardless of where it leads. While these individuals typically do not intend to disrupt or jeopardize the case, natural biases, prejudices, and preconceptions can often pose significant challenges. We handle these situations respectfully, creating space, presenting facts, and guiding the investigation along the lines provided by the evidence. This approach ensures that the investigation can proceed efficiently and effectively, allowing for the best possible outcomes. During the investigation, we received several complaints regarding a particular person's recollections concerning their family. We addressed these concerns directly and covered them in the podcast series. Some responses bordered on threats, but we understood the underlying emotion and the misunderstanding that was caused. There are often high emotions when it comes to the memory of someone who has passed and how the family intends to remember that person. Often, someone's recollection can taint or tarnish that memory without intent. It is crucial to recognize that manipulating statements to fit a single memory or a narrative is not an acceptable practice, and everyone has their own experience and a unique perspective based on how their interaction evolved at the time. In fact, in this particular scenario, the family member statements did not align with each other, highlighting the complexities and variances in individual recollections. That by no means makes a recollection wrong and someone else right. It's a memory, and it will never be perfect. We strive to handle such situations with sensitivity and respect, ensuring that all perspectives are considered without compromising the integrity of the investigation. This approach helps maintain the credibility and thoroughness necessary to uncover the truth. The Nelson family, whose name is synonymous with the manuscript, has no desire to participate further in the quest for truth beyond what they've already shared with law enforcement. One family member, who was not alive at the time of Jimmy's death, had not been born yet, has reached out to us and sent several lengthy messages. All this information, along with any associated details, has been shared with law enforcement. Should that family member wish to continue providing information, it will be assessed for its potential value to the investigation. First, I want to start off by talking about why there's been such a huge gap in our episodes. I think our last episode that we published was maybe 5 or 6 weeks ago. And there's just been a lot going on in our personal lives, not really with the podcast. That's kind of slowed down a little bit on the investigative side. We've also been trying to work on this case and develop this case more so that we had more information to bring to this last episode. Some of those pieces are still being developed and they're not ready to be presented yet. There's still some investigation that needs to happen. There's still some sensitivity with some of that information that's been escalated. And so that's kind of all led to a little bit of a slowdown in our publishing of episodes. Not that we have lost focus on solving this case for Jimmy. Obviously, that's a huge priority. And we haven't done any other episodes either. It's just been trying to get moved. We recently moved residences. I think that a lot of our listeners have been disappointed because they've been really trying to figure out, well, where does this go? Where does this story end? And we don't have an end yet because we're still trying to get justice. And it won't end until the person who killed Jimmy and the person who killed David are brought to justice. Right. That's when it really ends.
And for a lot of, whether it's podcasts or blogs and things of that nature, there's a good purpose for every style that's out there. Whether that's for entertainment. Sometimes the entertainment ones, though sometimes they may not be as accurate or they may not be as sensitive to families, things of that nature. There is a positive purpose for those. And typically they tend to have more viewers, more listeners, and there tends to be a lot more engagement in those types of approaches to presenting cases. And that's not how we have chosen to present cases. So for the Body of Crime family, we've chosen to really focus on the victims. And for that reason, we really try to do our best in sharing with our listeners who the victims are and really sharing their story and the people around their story instead of primarily focusing on whoever the predator is. And for that reason, we don't release episodes in a manner that is for the sole purpose of entertainment. And I say that because in doing that, sometimes you're not going to get that, hey, this is what was said the other day, we're going to go ahead and share that. Hey, this happened, we're going to go ahead and share that. Also, because of our backgrounds as well, there's some things that are not smart to share in the middle of an investigation, to be honest. It can cause damage to the case. It can cause damage to witnesses coming forward. It can cause damage to families of victims. And sometimes because so much happens in the background that people don't see, they're very unaware of that. And so they don't understand that though their heart might be in the right place, that sometimes some of those actions that we take can be very harmful, whether it's to the case or to the people who are involved. And it's not the right thing to do.
Right. In the military, we call that Opsac, operational security. You don't want to go out in the news and go, hey, the troops are moving from here to here and they're going to be traveling along this route. And because that allows the enemy to see what we're doing and where we're going and allows them to react to us before we're able to react to them. And in an investigation, OPSEC plays in the fact that if we put something out and go, hey, the police are looking at John Doe. Well, John Doe's going to hear that somehow, and then he's going to go into hiding, and then we're never going to find John Doe. So we don't want that to be the case. We don't want to give the bad guy the heads up.
Right.
We want to make sure that he remains in the dark until the police knock on the door and go, hey, sucker, we got you.
And sometimes, so some things that obviously are okay to share is if it's common knowledge that there's certain evidence out there or there's certain things that are out there that are in black and white, like there's nothing to refute there, that's not going to cause any type of damage to the case.
It's already out there.
But if you're putting people's names out there who are unknown, you could put them in danger. Things like that. There's so many different things. And also, if during the course of the investigation, you have some different people that are at odds and they don't necessarily know that they're at odds, there's no reason to highlight all of that, for a number of reasons, for safety reasons, for it, the purposes of them not going back and forth, which again, there's some podcasts and blogs and things of that nature that would take that information and put all that out because it makes it exciting and people want to listen and people get their feelings involved and then they start arguing and
there's damages caused by that. You damage the victims.
Right.
And that's what we try to avoid because what we don't want to do is we don't want to cause further harm. Right. We don't want to cause further pain. And sometimes when we're not sharing something or when we're not putting something out yet, it's because it's too sensitive of a topic to put out and it's going to cause further injury to the victims. And we don't want to do that.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about some of the negativity that we've encountered? Can you share any details and some of the negativity that we've encountered? Because we have gotten some very, I would say, direct feedback that was not positive.
And this has been from various people, whether it's, a family member of somebody who's been talked about in the podcast saying that some of the things that were said were not true and that we weren't looking at the truth, that we were just taking somebody's word. And what I want everybody to understand about that is this. When the police bring people in to talk to them and they separate them, that's done for a reason. They don't want for mom and dad and son to all stand there and give the exact same story because there's things that come out in everybody's stories that can align, whether they were right there in the exact spot with each other or they were positioned in a little bit different spaces within a room, in another room. There's things that come out in those stories. And the police don't think that you're lying. Don't think that because you and your dad and your mom's, story sounds a little bit different, that the assumption's going to be that you guys concocted this grand story. No, it actually looks odd for everybody to have exactly the same story because then it sounds like you guys all had a conversation and decided this is what we're going to say. It's going to differ a little bit because even our memories are a little bit different, especially years later. So that's another thing that's very different. You can go back there, there's a lot of people that will go back years later and read like their journal entries and they don't remember things. They're like, I don't remember it happening that way. So even for somebody who's self-reflecting based on their own stuff, they can recognize that, hey, like my memory is not what I thought.
Right.
So that was some of it. And there was multiple family members that reached out. And during that time frame, we don't want the person who chose to come forward with information or to say something to feel like what they're bringing to us adds no value or that nobody believes them, because that's not the case. You're dealing with humans, and humans have feelings, and feelings come out in the course of an investigation. When somebody pokes you, you don't just sit there like you weren't poked. It's a natural reaction to say ow or something.
Right.
You know, whatever your reaction is, because you're human. And so we expect that things like that are going to happen. And, and honestly, we use those things when that kind of feedback comes into us for any episode to get better. So is there a better way for us to approach these situations? Is there a better way for us to deliver certain information? Because definitely we never want to put information out there that's going to make somebody look bad, especially somebody that's deceased and, their family's remembering them in a certain way. That's definitely not our intent. So
right. We did invite anyone who responded to us or who sent us a message. We did invite them to come in and be a guest on the podcast and be able to share their story and their version of their recollection and speak on behalf of their family if they wanted to do that. Almost all of them chose not to. And we didn't share their messages, just to preserve their privacy. We did receive a lot of messages from the family members.
Right. In addition to that, and so the Nelsons, obviously we know, are connected to the manuscript that was mailed to Tracy Ferris in her California home, a home that had belonged to them back when Jimmy was assaulted and murdered. They do not have a desire to be involved from the ones that we've spoken to. There is one who has reached out to us with a couple different things, and they don't want to be contacted. And it's kind of funny because somebody will see like trails of something and say, oh, I know it's this person. And typically they're not very close to being accurate with whatever that is. When messages are relayed in a forum, like say, not even an email, I'll say like social media, we try to validate that that's even the actual person. And when we can't, that's one reason that we don't share. If there will be damage to the case, that's another reason we don't share. If they have a lot of family who don't want to share and they're the only ones who want to share, that's another reason that we're very careful about what we share. And again, this all plays into our priority in seeking truth and seeking justice and protecting victims. And if you're publicly telling everybody that certain family members are coming forward in a family where the family is not wanting to participate, it can damage the information that you're going to get, which goes against what we're trying to do. Prior to Body of Crime coming into assisting with Jimmy's case, Karen Lalonde had been doing some investigation.
Shout out to Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's the silent warrior in the background. She's putting a lot of work.
She had received some messages from somebody who initially didn't want to be known. They didn't want their name out there. That's common, and sometimes people are very bothered by that, but there's many different reasons why. They don't want their name out there because of who their family is, or they don't want their name out there because maybe they do have bad intentions. There's so many different reasons, but I want people to understand that when your goal is truth and justice and protecting the victim or victims, it is incredibly important that you don't violate people's trust and that you don't violate what people have asked you to do or not to do, unless it goes against the truth and justice seeking that you're doing,
Right.
And we're very honest with people when we talk to them. We never make requirements of people to get on a podcast and be recorded and have all their information out there. There's lots of people that we've talked to that are not included on the podcast and their names are never mentioned. Again, that's common, at least for us. We really feel like people who communicate with us should be able to trust us. And we want to show that respect to the people who are willing to take part in a case, especially an old case. A lot of people are like, that case is so old. What's the purpose? Why, what is me saying something this many years later going to do? And the beautiful thing is that when you get people who are willing to openly talk out, if you have people trying to say, oh no, that person's not telling the truth, and like you have these squabbles and you're publicizing them, well then people aren't going to want to come forward and say anything.
Yeah. Plus, you're distracting away from the case. He said, she said, this is true, this is not true. There's no way to validate any of that. You know, some of it's opinion. Some of it is just like my personal opinion. This person's ugly. Yeah. Well, that's just your opinion. Someone else might look at that person and go, "This person was very attractive. I don't understand why she said that." That's a lie. Right. It's really not a lie. It's just the person's opinion, and it's only their perspective. So you really have to take that with like a grain of salt and kind of like understand that memory is not going to be accurate 100%, no matter whose memory it is. And the longer that it's gone, that you're trying to scan back in your memory, the more opportunity for it to be a little bit off. Not that it's wrong and not that it's a lie, just that it's not 100% truth. It's only a perspective of the truth.
Right. Even something like Vandergriffs. So Vandergriffs Family was a little reluctant in the beginning to share Vandergriffs Statement, which they have, a copy of. Something that we couldn't openly get from the state of California. Right. So, do we want to give the listeners 100% of that information? Absolutely not. Why? Because it could cause damage to the case. Are there things in that statement that have no business being out for everybody to know? Probably. Again, our intentions are not to have the case be this sensationalized for your entertainment case. It's for trying to find justice for a little boy who was assaulted and murdered and whose killer has never been brought to justice. So I think it's important that people know that. Sometimes in the course of an investigation, it'll take a while to get things in, sometimes months. A lot of cases, cold cases we tend to work on, or even big cases that are currently like ongoing that haven't been solved, we tend to obviously spend more time on. But definitely for certain cases, it's going to take a lot longer for you to get certain things, to have access to certain things. And one of the things that took us a really long time to get was we did a request for the autopsy of Carmen Ardelman. And she is the woman who was murdered in California by Randy Garreau, who was convicted of her murder and went to prison. Every time when you're working a case and a new piece of information comes in that adds to the case in somehow, some way, is exciting, because you're thinking like, this is another little breadcrumb that's going to lead to a resolution in the case. And so when we got the autopsy, obviously we already knew some of the information from the autopsy, and we had already been through all the trial transcripts. So we already had a good piece of the story, but definitely the autopsy in itself brought out some new things that we're going to go ahead and share. So we know that she had 8 stab wounds. In order for somebody to stab somebody, murdering somebody in any kind of way is not the same. It's different when you can stand across a room and shoot somebody, accidentally hit somebody in a car, or purposefully hit somebody in a car, and then you having to be very close to somebody to manually strangle them or to physically stab them and to have their blood get on you. Those are all very different, and they require a different kind of perpetrator for each.
And also a different kind of motivation too.
Right. And those kinds of things also tell detectives certain things about a person, tell psychologists a certain thing, certain things about a person. And so in reviewing the autopsy, obviously when you're looking at a potential person of interest, when you're reviewing things, you're looking to see, is there anything that parallels with Jimmy's case or with David's case that we can pull out of this? And there's something that just was so, I think, alarming to me, was that they mentioned in the autopsy that there was 9 Pock-like ruptures. And what these are is they're intentional pokes, but not stabs. Now, the problem that I have, this autopsy was done back late 60s, early 70s. So when you're looking at how they were performing an autopsy back then, the level of detail is different than what you would see today. But going through it and seeing some of these things, the reason that this is such a big deal is because Pock-like ruptures, one, there's a sexual motivation where this comes from. This is kind of in the family. I'm not going to say kind of. It is in the family of mutilation. And mutilation is not very common amongst, if you were to group up all the different murders that there are, serial murders, whatever. Mutilation isn't a very common thing.
It's a marker.
Right, it's a marker. Pock-like ruptures are in the same category as sodomy with instrumentation. To be able to say something happened in Jimmy's case and something happened with Carmen that are similar, that's important.
Right. And we're talking about the mutilation being similar.
Right.
Yeah. And when you say Pock-like, really what you're describing is a poke of a knife, not deep enough to really stab someone, but deep enough to break the skin and make a small hole.
Right. And it could be a poke with anything, a screwdriver,
a pencil.
We're assuming in this case, because it doesn't say, we're assuming that it was a knife.
Right.
He did try to clean off the knife. We know this from the trial transcripts. And so I just want everybody to think for a minute about something, particularly with Randy, right? So we've identified Randy as a potential person of interest. Randy, who is now deceased, who spent his entire life in prison, didn't have a clean, spotless prison record, never was able to get out of prison his entire time in there from the time he was sentenced. Imagine being a killer for the first time and thinking of how many mistakes you would make and how scared you would be and how responsive you would be and how nervous you would be and paranoid you would be. He went into a home. He assaulted a woman. He first tried to strangle her. When he strangled her, he had the knowledge, which is not normal, to check to see if she was still breathing, if she was actually deceased. And when he realized she wasn't deceased with him manually strangling her, he then went and got a knife from the kitchen, came back to stab her. Something that really stands out, obviously, is the fact that he had the knowledge of having potentially strangled somebody before to even know that they would wake up, to know that, strangling somebody isn't a surefire way of killing somebody. So that right there is something important. That's an important detail.
Right.
It's also an important detail that he didn't get so freaked out and leave after he attempted to strangle her, or even get freaked out and leave after he stabbed her. Mm-hmm. There's these 9 Pock-like ruptures. Did he do them before he stabbed her? Did he enjoy the pain and watch her? Did he do it after she was deceased? There's a couple things that could hint at one or the other. Unfortunately, with what's listed in the autopsy, we can't really tell. I would be inclined to believe that it actually happened before she was deceased, but I'm not positive on that, just because of how it's written. Additionally, after stabbing her, he didn't just leave scared or try to clean up like himself. He tried to go wash the knife off. He actually left the knife there on the sink, but had almost completely cleaned the knife off. That isn't typical behavior of somebody who's committed their first murder.
Right. It's a little bit deliberate. It's
right.
Like, now I got to go clean the knife. Now I got to go clean, make sure I don't have no blood on my hands. He's going through a series of steps as if this is a routine.
Right. Also, something that's very interesting as well is that generally when somebody is murdered via stabbing, especially if it's your first murder and it's uncontrolled, the scene is very, very bloody. There's cast off from the knife, which occurs when you insert the knife and then pull the knife out.
Cast off is like a splatter. It's like
right.
swinging
it's like
the knife that has blood on it, and because it's wet, when you swing it, the blood flies off the knife and hits the wall, hits the floor, hits the ceiling.
Right. So there's no mention of any cast off whatsoever. And because of how the stab wounds are in the depth of some of them, and just to give you an idea, so the deepest stab wound that Carmen received from Randy was a little bit bigger than a pretty large grapefruit, pretty deep and near her sternum, which also isn't a very easy place to stab somebody. It requires a lot of pressure. There was not a lot of blood around her. The most amount of blood that was around her was to the top of one of her shoulders, where it blood had kind of come out and kind of dripped off and kind of run down her neck or shoulder, that area.
Which indicates that she was laying down when she was stabbed. Yeah.
And that he stayed over her the entire time that she was being stabbed. So, and there were some marks on her arms and things like that that would indicate like how he was holding her and things of that nature. But just about all of her bleeding was internally because of his position and her position and the controlled stabbing. So this means that he wasn't going crazy, stabbing her, scared, or had this adrenaline spike. It was controlled, which is honestly, it's a scary thought when you're looking at how somebody was killed, because you're thinking this is not somebody who like this is their first time in it, or it was an accident, or it was
it's not a reactive stabbing. It's more of a deliberate enjoyment of the process.
Right. And then to top it off, his proximity to Carmen, the proximity to David, the proximity to Jimmy. There's some parallels there. And then in addition to that, the primary reason that Randy was caught for the murder of Carmen was that he attempted to break into and assault another woman also in the neighborhood.
Right.
And
within a short period of time.
Within a very short period of time.
Yeah.
Typically, if you've done a crime and you're like thinking, oh, people are going to know, maybe somebody saw me, you tend to like kind of shut down and calm down, and your behavior calms down. His didn't.
Yeah. Typically also when you've done something that you regret, you talk yourself out of doing it again. You're like, oh, I'm never doing that again. Oh, I can't believe I did that. Like there's some internal dialogue that happens where you try to rationalize that if you don't get caught, I'm never going to do this again. Like not in his case. In his case, he was like ready to go within 30 days, already looking for his next victim, which is indicative of a pattern similar to like a serial killer.
Absolutely. And, something, very, very interesting is that back then, there was somebody who had reviewed the autopsy and any photos that they took or anything that talked about, which at the time was very new, but when this guy got on the stand and was talking about the murder, he was talking about hesitation marks. And I was thinking, when I read it, I was thinking to myself, why is he saying hesitation marks? What is he seeing in the stabbing that indicates that there was hesitation? Which, when stab wounds are described, they're described based on their size, the opening. It tells you a lot about how the person was stabbed.
Right.
So they'll describe like the opening size, like the length, then they'll describe the width, like how much it's opened up, and then the depth. And they'll describe also how it looks so that they can determine, was the person potentially stabbed from up high, down low. It tells a different story. And so in this case, the edges were so clean. The size differences are a little bit different based on the depth, but there's no like jagged edges. There's no like weird position of the knife in any of the wounds. So when I had read the trial transcript and when they were talking about the hesitation marks, I was thinking, why? What about it? Because they didn't explain. Like there was nothing there that really explained it, what he was talking about. But at the time, it was something new. He had read a book, and he even says this on the stand. They question him about it. But I believe that what he was referring to was those additional marks, that he was unaware of what those were.
Right.
And assumed that he was scared and didn't want to stab her. Would be, now this is my guess.
Right. So you're saying that the pock marks, the short, small stabs, the person who did the investigation or the coroner who did the autopsy was saying that those were hesitation stab wounds as opposed to some type of sexual gratification type of injuries.
Or an intentional mutilation.
An intentional mutilation. So it's possible that he could have misinterpreted those as hesitation stab marks, meaning I want to, but I'm not committing to the stab, so I'm poking you with the knife, but I'm not really going deep enough to stab you. But obviously with the additional stab wounds, they were all very deliberate. She was laying down, and they were pressure stab wounds that were direct, not swinging,
right,
not slashing, they were very pressurized where I'm placing the knife on you and then I'm pushing in a very controlled manner.
Yeah.
There's no hesitation there.
Right.
There's no opportunity for hesitation there.
I don't want to say that, this coroner did a bad job or anything like that.
He didn't know.
You're talking about years ago where we just, and it seems like it wasn't that long ago, when you think about it, but it was. And, there was a lot of stuff scientifically that we hadn't figured out. There's also a lot of research that hadn't been done yet when it comes to things like serial killers and things of that nature, where we've done a lot of research and we've learned a lot about different patterns with mutilation or with sexual gratification. And so now we know a lot more. And so if a coroner were to look at this same case now, it would be looked at differently.
Right. It would tell a different story than it told in the 1960s.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
We have reached out to some of Carmen's family, and there is a potential that, not that we're going to bring them on the podcast, but there's a potential that we're going to talk to them a bit about the case, because there is a potential that this case will be a little bit more public than it's been. And because of that, we want to make sure that nothing, this autopsy, guys, is very graphic and doesn't compare to what you see in the trial transcripts. And because of that, we want to be sensitive to Carmen's family. This is some stuff that they may have never heard or seen. And we want to make sure that they're fully aware of all of this and these potential parallels before, things become very public. At this time, there are at least 2 people alive who could potentially be considered key witnesses, with one being a potential person of interest. As these 2 states race against the clock on these cases, we will monitor the progress and update our listeners as new information is brought to light. There are some details that we cannot discuss publicly due to the risk of degrading the case by revealing sensitive information. However, we remain optimistic that between these 2 states, California and Washington, we will see one or both cases potentially closed soon. If the potential person of interest in either case is alive, there is a possibility for a deal to be made or a jury trial to be scheduled. We will continue to keep our audience informed with the latest developments while respecting the integrity of the ongoing investigations.
And I just want to be clear, we're talking about Randy and Bill. So if we're talking about Randy and Bill, we're talking about Randy being deceased already, and then we're talking about Bill, who is still alive.
Right.
Now, when Jimmy Gaul was killed, Randy was how old?
Randy was 12.
Randy was 12. So if Randy killed Jimmy Gaul at the age of 12, he would never have been questioned. No one would have ever asked for his alibi at that time.
We know,
because I know they questioned Bill, because Bill was 16.
Well, and we know that there was a few people that they questioned. However, there was never a 12-year-old listed.
Right.
And that would have more than likely have been mentioned. So there is a very high probability that he was never even considered
a suspect.
Right, at the time.
Because of his age.
Not even just because of his age, but it just if nobody called him out. And if the police just thought at the time, he's too young. Because even now, a lot of people think, oh, they're too young. There's actually some child psychologists that deal specifically with younger kids who murder, who talk about the different age groups and how the brain is at those ages, and why at certain ages it's easier to commit certain crimes because of their thought process is different than an adult. They don't have a lot of that, that critical thinking built in yet, or, a lot of the things that we start to learn when it comes to our morals and values and things of that nature that they just haven't mentally gotten yet.
Right.
So what is the best case scenario if a guilty person or guilty persons are still alive? Between California and Washington, it's going to work a little bit different. So was this person or these people responsible for, one of these murders, both of these murders, or other murders? Well, it depends on the state. So obviously what state it happened in, laws are a little bit different. And of course, if they find that this person or these people have committed, crimes in multiple states, that's a little complex, because the laws are different. But regardless, they would identify who that person is or those people are. There would be an arrest. There would be legal proceedings. They would file charges against the suspect. They would do a preliminary hearing. Then the case proceeds to trial if the evidence is sufficient. Now, during this process, what I want people to understand is that there is a potential that they do a deal instead of going to a trial. Trials are expensive. It costs a lot of money. It requires, a lot of people to be in there. They have to bring people in for a jury. So when prosecutors can save money and close a case by offering a deal, like saying, hey, like, you're going to be found guilty, so we're going to offer you a deal based on the information that we have. So what does that mean for everybody hearing what the final conclusion is? They will publicly do an announcement, more than likely. If they do not, I'm pretty sure that we would probably get some information from them, and eventually it would be public regardless. They may not do a public announcement, but it would become public at some point. Now, what's the best case scenario if the guilty person or people are deceased? So in the case that somebody is deceased, that doesn't mean that there's no case closure. They can still close a case. They do a formal case review. Law enforcement and legal authorities will review all the evidence to ensure that it's strong enough. Basically, almost kind of like the same process that they go to when they say, can this case go to trial? And if the answer is yes, then they're able to close the case. So they'll do a case closure report. And basically what they do is they do a detailed report. They outline all the evidence implicating the person or the people. And then the report will include any type of evidence that they have, any notes, any witnesses, statements, things of that nature. And then same deal. They'll do some legal documentation. They'll say that it's been cleared. And there's a couple different things depending on the state again, how they'll list it, like how it's been closed. But they'll close it, and then they'll do some type of announcement. They'll still have a case file that's that they make a little bit more comprehensive with everything, and then close it down. And then they'll do a death certificate note, basically with the new details. And then at that point, for depending on the various state laws, then information will be available to the public. This is when you'll be able to see. California is one of the more strict states when it comes to releasing information. For the most part, it doesn't matter in California how many years it's been since the crime was committed. They're very tight with the information that they'll release. So we were able to get Carmen's autopsy because there was a conviction in her case. That wouldn't be the case if there wasn't a conviction. It would be pretty hard to try to obtain something like that when there hasn't been a conviction. And again, this has to do with the quest for truth and justice. And it's not about trying to not let the public know or things of that nature. It's about protecting the integrity of the case.
As we conclude this episode of Who Murdered Jimmy Gaul, the final threads unraveled. The journey through this complex case has uncovered remarkable connections and led us down some very unexpected paths. From parallel disappearances to the intricacies of community involvement, this investigation has been a testament to the persistence of justice. While challenges and complexities persist, the collaborative efforts with law enforcement and the community offer hope for resolution. As we wait for updates from both California and Washington, we remain committed to keeping our listeners informed. We hope that you will continue to journey with us as this case continues evolving, as we push to seek closure for Jimmy Gaul and all those affected by these tragic events. And as we close this episode, I just want to really send out a message of gratitude for all the people that have participated in continuing to push this case and continuing to keep Jimmy's memory alive. I know that there are a lot of people that are emotionally invested in this case. And we want to continue to inform and update and share what we know as we know it when we can share it, and really continue to pursue this to closure. So even though we say the final thread's unraveled in this case, I think it's going to continue to be a topic of discussion until this case is closed. So just want to thank everyone who's come forward, even the people who have come forward from a negative perspective where they've been a little bit unhappy with how things have been shared. Even their engagement has been helpful for us from the perspective of the case, from the perspective of how we interact with the victims and victims' families. I think we've learned through this process, and we continue to strive to be better and to get better. And so we want to thank even the people that didn't like our podcast or didn't like how we shared some of the information that we shared. We really are trying to come from a very good place and coming from a place of compassion and a place of love.
And one thing, for those who have never closely dealt with anybody who's lost a child, we're getting ready to release an episode for a case that we worked a very long time on who's just now getting some of the final answers from an investigation that was escalated in their state. We did some interviews with the family who we've dealt with very closely since everything first happened, and it will really give you a great insight into what occurs after a tragedy has taken place with people closest to that person and what that feels like and how their journey of grief is. And I think it would be very eye-opening to anybody who has not experienced that to hear that.
And that's a wrap on today's investigation, fellow detectives. If you found this episode both enlightening and captivating, then please subscribe to our podcast show and our Patreon. Leave a review and hit that like button. Share our podcast with others and engage with us on our website and social media platforms. You can find us on all major podcast platforms as well as our website at www.bodyofcrimepodcast.com, where you can access all of our episodes and bonus content, including valuable resources. By expanding our community, we believe we can make a greater impact in our pursuit of truth and in shedding light on crucial cases. If there's a case that you'd like for us to cover or a personal story you'd like to share, please don't hesitate to contact us through our website. We always welcome your feedback and suggestions. Until next time, stay sharp, and thank you for tuning in to the Body of Crime podcast.
Bye.